Hey everybody, this is Ann and welcome back to Painting Big. Today we are going to talk about the colors for NMM. Yes, finally, after doing all these different NMM projects, we are finally going to talk about different colors for gold, for steel and silver, for copper, and for bronze. All right, let's get to it. All right, so I have some example minis here, and then I'm going to actually demo the copper. Obviously, we've been doing some steel, and let's just get our friend the orc right here. So I'm going to show you some examples. I'm going to talk about the exact colors I used. So for our orc, I have talked before about how I mix a little bit of another color into my grays for NMM, but let's actually talk about everything in my gamut that I use. So let's set these paints up. I'll zoom out a little bit. All right, there and there. So these are my go-tos. These days. It used to be more like that, but lately I've liked to start a little darker with my gray mix. So I mix a little bit of carbon gray into my cloudy gray. These are all Reaper MSP paints. You can find probably equivalents for like the cloudy gray for sure. You just want a mid-dark gray, a blue gray, a white. Those are easy. These are a little harder. Gray liner is kind of a translucent black, so it's a little bit harder to find a match for that. You can certainly take some black or really dark gray and just thin it. You just essentially want something that's going to play a little nicer and blend a little better. A lot of blacks in today's market are very high coverage, and that means when you need to put tiny little shadows down, it's really hard to get anything that's going to look like it's going to blend. So you have to thin your black a lot. I would say pre-thin a lot if you're going to use a standard black for this. And you may even want to mix a tiny bit, just a tiny bit of your gray into it, just to make it play a little better with the blending. Closer, like you can shove it a little bit. You need it to be dark, but it doesn't have to be like a dead black for you to use it as a shadow in steel. And then with the blue, and obviously you can use a green or a brown or even a purple. You usually, if you're not using something, I default to blue because sky reflection, is always a thing. My models are mostly painted like they're outside, so that works, right? But if you have a particular color in the surroundings, you can mix a little bit of that in, whatever you want to do. Essentially, you're just trying to not have a totally lifeless gray for your steel because it does reflect things from the environment, right? And yet, at 28 millimeter, I find it's sometimes hard to put those environmental reflections in. I totally could up here on the sword, I could put some blue along the top edge for sure. And here, if I knew where this guy was standing, like if he was in a forest, I could add some greens and browns into this dark shadow or just above it to essentially suggest that I've got some colored light. Like if there's grass here, I could add some green into this lower highlight, for example. So on a big broad thing like a shield, you can absolutely do that. I haven't really demoed that. Maybe we'll do a demo on that in the future. But if you're just going to try to figure out your NMM, you're a beginner, you're not going to mess with colored reflections yet, you just want to figure it out, then I just say mix a little bit of a given color into your gray. And I don't actually use a light gray in my gamut here. I mix my main gray, I add my blue to it, and then I just add white to build a couple of incremental grays going up from there. And then I end with pure white. So that's your steel. And there's so many ways to do steel. I know people who, the triad that carbon gray is in also has a color called moonstone blue, which is a very pale blue. So you could actually, let's pick something similar. This is a little darker. But you could actually use this Akata blue, say, mixed with your carbon gray as your midtone, right? And then just highlight with your Akata blue until you get to the point where you go up to pure white. That'll give you a much more blue steel kind of look if you do that, if you use this instead of using cloudy gray plus white, right? Or cloudy gray plus ash and blue. But you can do that. Like there's all sorts of different ways to create steel mixes, and I'm not going to be able to give you every single one of them. But you shouldn't look quizzically at somebody just because they give you a different mix for it. I mean, it's all right. All that matters is, does it work for you? So try a bunch of different mixes. See something, see if you can find something that you really enjoy. Like that's the bottom line in mini painting, folks. Like try it. If it works for you, use it. Like nobody has the right to tell you that what you're doing is wrong. Like if it works for you, it works, and that's it. All right, so let's, with that in mind, get off my soapbox here. Let's talk about gold. So I've got Barbie Dwarf here. She's almost done. We're painting her on Reaper Pro Tips. And yes, I meant Barbie dwarf. Totally Barbie dwarf. So here's Barbie. I wanted a really bright gold for her. My gold tends to be pretty standard. The only difference in it is whether I start with a more vibrant brown, one that's kind of more punchy, or whether I use one that's more greenish and faded. See how that one's more greenish and faded. So if I want that faded greenish color, I can, and yes, Reaper does have an NMM Gold Triad. And actually I've got that here to show you, and then I'll tell you how I tend to do it, which is a little different. So the color that everybody used to use for NMM Gold was kind of a yellow ochre, yellow oxide, and that's mostly what NMM Gold base is. It has some other yellow pigment in it as well. And then we've got NMM Gold Highlight. So this is totally doable as a gold triad. You would add a darker shadow on this end, and you would add a pure white on this end. I like my gold a little more yellow. So if you look at Barbie next to these colors, hopefully we can get a little closer and you can see she's maybe a little more yellow. She's got a bit more yellow in her gold. So what I tend to do these days, because I like to mix, is I will actually start with a brighter brown, like rich leather. And with that, I'm going to work up to a lantern yellow and white mixture, and then up to pure white. So this is going to be a lot brighter, a lot more yellow of a gold, right? And I usually do introduce just a tiny bit of rich leather into the lantern yellow so it doesn't go cartoon yellow. But this gives me more of that bright gold look that I wanted on her. So there's the shield. Let's get close to that. You can see how much shadow I'm putting there, but see how yellow that is? Like her hair, I went very yellow with it as well, and then the shield is very yellow. So I'm keeping a lot of darks in here. My shadow tends to be brown liner. For gold, I tend to use, let's just back up and get my russet. There we go. Okay, so these are the colors that I tend to use for gold. Again, if you use the NMM Gold Triad, it's going to be great. It's going to be fine. I will say, if you want a brighter gold, but you still want to use this Triad, use it, but then maybe put a wash or a glaze of lantern yellow over it before you add your pure white highlight. And that'll give you that richer color, like just putting a glaze of lantern yellow or something orange yellow, like Saffron Sunset is another good one. This is a more brown color, but this is also good. Any of these orangey yellows are a good call for this. So you can glaze that or wash a real light wash that over your gold triad, and it will make it brighter. If you want a dimmer gold or a more muted gold, then definitely go with your NMM Gold Shadow and NMM Gold Base and your NMM Gold Highlight. Gold Highlight, by the way, is also a great color just in general for building highlights on orange and on green when you're looking for a more organic, softer color and you don't need a bright yellow. So, my gold. These two colors I mix together to get a shadow. The reason I don't go, and this is Russet Brown, 91.99. The reason I don't go just straight to the brown liner is that when you have a color with a lot of yellow in it and you mix something with a lot of black in, it tends to go greenish, right? Just like this. That's how you get that more greenish color with this NMM Gold Shadow is you've added black. So by adding Russet Brown, which has a bit of like a lot of brown oxides in it, I dim that black a little bit and I make it a friendlier, really dark brown to use as a shadow for that rich leather. And that's exactly what we've done with these really dark, rich tones on Barbie's shield in the shadow. That's what that color is. Then the rich leather tends to be my base coat. Rich leather is also an equivalent for Artist's Raw Sienna. So if you're using artist colors or pure colors, pure pigments, then Raw Sienna is your equivalent for this. This is an orange shade yellow or an orange phase yellow, depends on which company you're getting it from. But any of the orange yellows will work here. Just the more intense, the more saturated it is, the brighter your gold's going to be. And then, of course, pure white has to be your highlight for any metal. You can go with a slightly off-white, but it has to be a super bright light on the model to indicate that the light is reflecting. You need that. You need that bright spot of highlight in order for it to look shiny. All right, so there's our gold. So let's talk about bronze because it's very, very similar. And here I'm going to go a little odd on you because I'm going to throw this NMM Gold Shadow in here. So you could build a bronze with rich leather. It would be a much more bright bronze. And I may use this even for a highlight here. So it's very similar. So let's take that yellow out and just go here. So when you mix rich leather with pure white, you get kind of a light golden brown, which is actually a great highlight for bronze. And we'll look at Mr. Corgi here. I've done his armor as a bronze. It's a dark bronze. Bronze tarnishes very, very dark, right? So I definitely have some brown liner in there along the edges here. And of course, when it does tarnish, it can also verdigris. It doesn't always, but it can. So you can use dark greens or even some blues. Look up pictures of verdigris, bronze verdigris, and you'll probably get some pictures you can use as far as colors. The triad for the copper NMM does have a verdigris in it, but this is much more a copper verdigris. Bronze I find is a little bit of a darker green. Bronze is a copper alloy, so a lot of the same colors are going to show up in verdigris for bronze as copper, but I do find they do shift a bit. So your base color is really going to be kind of one of these greenish browns. NMM Gold Shadow is actually one that I used here. Another great color for this is 9127 Uniform Brown. Any of these kind of like a little bit faded but still kind of rich golden browns can be used. I used the rich leather as kind of a highlight, although it is rather transparent, so it's more just used to intensify, like this band here is definitely rich leather. Then for this lighter brown color, I'm using white plus rich leather. And if I decide I want it just a little bit more intense, I can use a touch of a yellow in there. Be careful though, because if you go too yellow with it, it is going to look like a dark gold and not a bronze. So you can warm it up, but keep it golden brown. And then I'm using my pure white, to build up those highlights. So that's the bronze. And finally, let's talk about copper. I keep a couple of these out. Throw a couple of these over to the side. And yeah, we have a copper NMM triad here. So, when it came time to make this triad, it's an odd triad because it doesn't really have a shadow to it. It's got tarnished copper, new copper, and copper verdigris. And this is pretty much that orangey color that copper goes when it gets really tarnished. This is more the bright new penny copper, and it does often... if you want something between these two, you can. Again, you can add a touch of yellow to this because we all know that as this starts to shift toward this, it gets very orange, right? So if you want to simulate that sort of copper, maybe add a little yellow to this, and I'll maybe show that in a bit. But instead of going for a shadow with the triad, I ended up going with a verdigris because we didn't really have a color that could be used at the time. We didn't have a color that could be used for this. And I had been getting requests about it because a lot of painters like to paint weathering and verdigris on their models. And the other thing that influenced me is I already had a color that matched that tarnished penny color, and that is russet brown. So if you really want the triad, then you're looking at 9199 russet brown, which is also an equivalent for artist's burnt umber. And you're looking at tarnished copper, and you're looking at new copper. For lining or for dark shadows, I would still go with the brown liner. And verdigris, like I said, a lot of copper verdigris is pretty chalky looking, and so this copper verdigris color does fit. It also can go a little darker green though, so you can use any other green, mix it into this. As long as it's like a darker bluish green, I would say. I wouldn't go with a pure yellowy green. That tends not to look the right way. And then of course you need the pure whites, right? So just to reiterate, we've got russet brown, tarnished copper, new copper, verdigris if you want it. We have a lot of other blue-greens that can work for this as well, so if you don't want to use this particular color, feel free. Just look at pictures, make sure you kind of get a color that would look realistic, right? And then, of course, the pure white is always in there. So let's do a little bit of painting with this. I've set up an orc. I've got my colors here. Here we are. So I've got some liner, I've got my russet brown, I've got my tarnished copper, and I've got my new copper. I did mix a little bit of the tarnished into the new. I wanted it to be a little closer. I find that that helps a bit when you're trying to paint with these colors because they're so different, right? So usually with the new copper, what you want to do is concentrate on areas that might look scuffed, right? If the copper has been scuffed or polished by getting rubbed up against a lot, you're going to see that color more. But then I tend to mix these two when I'm doing regular highlights. So let's choose a direction. Let's say the light is coming from this direction. I'm going to actually use my russet brown to block in a shadow along this edge. And because NMM, I'm also going to use the russet brown to go underneath. Let's get a little bit back from here so you guys can see. So I'm going to use the russet brown to go underneath each of these studs as well for a shadow. You can see though that the russet brown isn't terribly dark, and so to get the contrast we need, we will be bringing in that brown liner. I'm just going to get those quick underneath down here. Now, if I look at where my light is falling here, I can see that a lot of this is in shadow. So I'm going to just block in a lot of that russet brown down underneath. There we go. And you will find that it looks more and more like a penny as you go with this. Like I said, though, you can go pretty orange with the highlight here should you wish to, and I can kind of demo that in a moment. So let's just try with our regular new copper. Let me get my brush set here. I'm going to do a mix of tarnished copper and new to set up kind of what I'm doing. So you see how that pinky color comes in. The other thing you can do is just like with the gold thing I was talking about, you can glaze with the yellow color to warm this up if you want to. Let's add a little yellow into this and I'll show you how it looks. So if you want more of an orangey, like just the new penny that's just starting to tarnish, right? Then you're bringing in that lantern yellow, and I'm just really doing little tiny mixes. I don't want to orange this up too much, but I can orange it up a bit. And then when I bring that in here, it's going to change the look of it a bit. And I might want to do a mixture of all of these, really. I'm using my big brush here because I want to go fast. So that gives you more of an orangey color. So if you like that better than the pinky orange that the new copper is, you can do that. Something like that. Let's get this. It's kind of rounded, this surface, so I'm kind of making a rounded scallop shaped highlight, and I'm going to go over here and get a little bit of reflection by lightening it up on the other side. Reflected light, right? Like so. And we want to grab some of that and bring it down onto this lower part. So we've got those coming out. So you can see how that's starting to look more coppery. And then the further we go, I'll bring in some white. Just kind of bringing that in, accentuating this line right here, getting this edge here. So yeah, you can control how pinkish or how orangish you want your copper to be, right? So I mixed in the orange there, and now that's really, really looking very orangey. If I want to take it down a bit, I can glaze with my original color, the tarnished copper color. So I'm making kind of a glaze. It's like colored water. And I could brush that over a lot of this if I want to take down a bit of that orange and shift it a little bit more back toward the brown. I just brush the glaze over the surface. For those of you who have not watched my video on glazing for fundamentals of mini painting, that'll show you exactly what I'm doing in detail. But there we can see how that's starting to look really reddish, right? And then you throw some green verdigris in there and throw in your white highlights. And you can mess around with this quite a bit, twisting it one way or that, and it'll still look like copper of some sort. When you throw in the verdigris is when it really starts to sell it, though. So I like to do tarnished copper a lot, but we don't really have time for today's video. I'll probably do like a little bit on weathering or tarnishing, verdigris, rust, stuff like that. I'll do it at some point. I do have stuff like that on my Patreon. So if you are on there or thinking of being on there, there is already stuff there. I do keyword everything on my Patreon, so if you just type in, you know, like weathering or verdigris or something, you should be able to get, or NMM copper or NMM bronze, whatever, you should, it should show you everything you need. But here we go, a little bit of extra highlight down here. And there you are. So it is very coppery. And that's super fast. Like, right, I just pretty much threw that together. But if you spent more time, it would look better. That's always it with miniature painting. I always tell people it's like futzing. It's 100% futzing. The difference between a competition model and a model that you just painted quickly for your gaming table is like the amount of futzing you end up doing. So like my gaming models are just fast and loose, and there's not a lot of like actual, like I wet blend, but I don't really try to blend. But I do that same thing if I'm setting up a competition model. I just refine it more. So there you go. There's your copper. It's quite orangey, quite deep tarnished copper there. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you have some ideas now as far as different colors to use for your NMM. Of course, this is all MSP. I don't really have the ability to give you a lot of equivalencies, but I did mention some artist equivalencies for colors, so hopefully that helps you along if you're not using MSP. All right, thanks everybody. Again, I do a $2 PDF for this on my Patreon. I'll have that up shortly. Thank you for your patience this month. I was off on a big trip around the holidays, and we got back just a couple days ago, so I've been scrambling. So thanks very much, and hopefully we will be a bit more on time next month. All right, excellent. I hope you all had a great holiday season. I'm looking forward to 2025, and thanks. This is Anne signing off.